Welcome to this demonstration of the Omega11 system from Kenia Software. What we're seeing on the screen now is the login screen. This establishes the permissions of the user and how the functions they use are allocated to them, where they're allowed to go, what records they're allowed to see and change. There's a couple of different types of login, a SQL login versus a trusted login. In this example, I will be using a trusted login that interacts with a Windows Active Directory. Once the screen opens, where you will be at the main menu of the program, across the top, we're going to see a series of 10 buttons, and these 10 buttons represent the core workflow of the program. About 80% of our users spend about 90% of their time in just these buttons across the top. The intention of this demonstration video is to cover the workflow of the system. It's not going to include the entire evaluation of the software. That would take several hours to do, so we'll keep our focus to just the core workflow. Now, the full menu of all the items that we have is available over here on the side, and we can see there are several options. Many of these are for configuration and setup, but many are also utilities, tools, and or features that we offer that can be used to accompany the core workflow. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'd like to use kind of a real world example that we have received a group of samples in a cooler from a client. So what we first need to do is to create what we call a work order. A work order is a collection of samples that contain certain testing requirements and other sampling information that will be reported on a single report that could have an EDD, an invoice with it, along with several different formats of files. So in our toolbar at the top, we use the Add button, and we have to have a client already existing. So I'm going to use the Acme Corporation. After I set the company ID, then I have to declare what kind of work order. We can work off a standard, which is our standard library of tests with our standard pricing. No special advanced selections of any scope of work, just a la carte, if you would. We can do a project, which is a predefined site and set of samples that already has information populated in templates that's going to greatly speed our login process, or from a quote, which strictly has some pricing but no sample details available. So we'll start out with a standard. I say OK, and it goes ahead and it creates, it's first telling me I have a master quote for this particular client, or master pricing. If I say yes, it's going to redirect me to that quote. In this case, I'm going to say no, so that we stay as a standard work order. This work order was given by the system this number here, 1512001. This numbering system has some meaning to it. The 15 are the last two digits of the current year, 2015. The 12 represents the 12th month, so December, and the 001 is the first work order I've made in December of 2015. As these last three digits reach 999, then it will loop over and start using alpha characters. So I'll get A01, and it'll continue on all the way to ZZZ. So we can do several thousand work orders each month with this naming convention. So then at this point, there's a number of optional fields that we can use. So NPDES may be my project name, project number, contract ID, tracking number. Many of these are required for some of the higher level government work, but they are totally optional and do not have to have any values for the system to go forward. Over here we see is the turnaround time in business days that has been assigned to this particular client. It can be different in quotes and projects and per client if you want to. The same with the number of disposal days. These are the days after reporting that the samples are eligible to be disposed of. Based on my receive date, it used this 7-day turnaround time to establish a due date for the work order. This entire date field range represents the workflow of this work order. So as we go and we build it, there's going to be a review step after I've entered all the information that I'm going to enter. As soon as the last test is completed, the work order will become completed. When the last test is validated, the whole work order will become validated, and then I'm ready for reporting and invoicing and disposal and accounting. So in a standard work order, we have to go to the sample login. This is also true of a quote work order, and add a sample manually. And this could be outfall number 12. It's an aqueous sample, and how many bottles we got. I got 3 bottles. You can even go as far as where you are storing those. Walk-in cooler number 1, bin number 23. At that point, it assigns the sample ID, and the letter at the end represents the fraction of the sample. So within any given sample, you can have multiple fractions. So for example's sake, we'll say sample number 1 got the ICP metals test on there, 200.7, and that assigned my bottle code type. So I have 3 bottles that are plastic and preserved with nitric acid. I can add additional fractions and how many bottles. Say I have 2 bottles in here, and we'll put them in the same location. So now I have another bottle fraction set that could be another type of test. So if we come down my drop-down list and say this is TSS, then we have a plastic unpreserved bottle. So now the system will make me put in the 1B bottle for this particular test. And for the 1A bottle, I can enter results for 200.7. Otherwise, the system will give me a error message saying I'm using the wrong bottle for the wrong test. Now, in this metals test here, we have a feature called the selection list, where I can go in and select which of my the analytes I would like to use. So we have a quick tool to turn them all off or on, and then I can come in and say I only want aluminum and antimony. This represents my test code or my test library's normal limits, and here are some fields that are for requested limits in case the client would like to have elevated or special limits applied. These 2 fields represent a minimum and maximum contaminant limit, or think of it as a permit limit or a threshold value. So if I establish 1,000 here, then if I have an aluminum result equal to or greater than this limit, the system will automatically flag. We do have 2 different pricing models, one priced by individual analyte and one to price by the total test. So in this case, I said yes to the individual pricing. I had 2 elements, analytes, and they were $15 each, so it is $30. We can do tests as a rush, and you can establish the different rushes and rush time frames and surcharges that you'd like to charge for it. and that will flag this as a rush and update the due date and update the pricing as needed. Samples also contain an area in which you can have some field data transcribed. Who was the field sampler? What kind of sampling was it? It was a grab sample. We can actually customize this list to anything you would like to have appear here. A conductivity measurement done in the field, and say it was measured in microohms per centimeter. We could put the analyst in there. We can put the date and time in there. That will all come forward. Now, this field information can be controlled on whether it is reported or not based upon this checkbox over here to report this. Now, we can make easy copies of this and say we want to make a copy of sample 1, and then now this outfall number 13. And it made a full copy of all the details we just made. So maybe my value's a little bit different. And for this sample, so say 147, and it was collected by someone else. And that's how we can go ahead and build samples and their fractions. We also have the ability to create groups of tests that we can use that can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to do an influent sample here, and I'm going to add a group to it. This is a Detroit Water and Sewer Department group, and we'll see by selecting that one selection, it actually created 5 different fractions and had each one with a particular test and predefined select lists and prices. So that's another quick, easy way to go ahead and create a large number of values and records within the system. Now, once the samples have been logged in, we can review them from over here. We can check the financial pricing, the billing address. We can enter a PO here. We can put comments on the bill. We've got a total bottom line price. You can add additional custom charges, an equipment charge, a field test charge, a rental charge. For those labs that are under an accreditation requirement, we can do a sample acceptability check with this checklist. This is where we can get a chain of custody present, yes or no. Was it signed out and relinquished, yes or no? Was it filled out right? Does it agree with the labels? Is everything clear what they want? Did they give you the right bottles? Did they give you the right preservatives? Were the containers intact? Did they give you enough volume for the indicated tests? Did you take the temperature? Yes. It was between 3 and 5 degrees in the cooler. I had cooler number 456, and the cooler temperature was 4 degrees, and it was in good condition. I can list my ISCO that I used to sample this particular record. Now, ISCO number 1, and I can list all the equipment used in the field if needed. I can put tracking numbers, how we got it. We got it from DHL or FedEx, received by this particular individual. Container level tracking. We can go ahead and determine where, which receipt this came in under, which cooler it came under, the temperatures, and make individual comments per bottle. You know, cap was loose on this bottle. So with all that said, we can go ahead and complete this, and this requires you to enter a password which turns into a digitized signature. Now if we close that and came back in, it is now locked. No values can be changed unless you have the proper authority to unlock this. As we preview this page, you can see the signature appear up here. And if we go to the end, we've got the full bottle documentation and whether we contacted the client or not. So besides our checklist on that, we can also do a summary that would help us determine whether we logged this in correctly or not. And this summary report would give us a breakdown of what tests, what selected analytes were added to it, the test code, the storage location. And I can use this to compare against my chain of custody that may be available for me to find out what they wanted. So as we come over, we can link files to this work order as well. So I can link my chain of custody into here, and I can go ahead and find that document on my desktop or wherever it is and attach that. So what this does is it actually takes a copy of the document and loads it up into the system. And then you have, once the documents are in the system, you have to approve them or void them. Right now it's considered just a draft. So if I double click there, now it's approved and it's a COC type document. This is not a traditional COC. This was for example purposes only, but if you double click, it opens the file that you recently attached. If I sent this out to anywhere, I would have some records to the side here of me emailing this out. So if we use the email button, I can go ahead and choose who to email that document, and it went ahead and populated all of this information into the body of the email based on my login information. So that went into the queue. Now we see a record here of who it went to, how it was distributed, mailed, faxed, downloaded from the website, and so forth. So this is how we get samples in there. So at this point, we go ahead and log in review. What this is telling me is that we have not entered the pH readings of the bottles to match with the requirements for this test code. So we can cancel that, go back into login, and I can enter my pH for my bottles. This is where we would go ahead and read each particular bottle pH and so on and so forth. So the sample that was complaining on was this particular one right there. So I'm going to go ahead and close this, and I can go ahead and review this, and that puts the review date in there. Similar to the checklist, our review date changes the status of the work order and engages a lock. That way nobody can accidentally or intentionally change something without the proper authority. So you must have the certain role or authority granted, and then you can unlock, and then you can make a change as needed. As you saw, I just did, across here are a number of filter buttons that filter your work orders to all the work orders at that particular status. So under completed, I have 3 work orders that are completed, but they're not yet validated. So if I look at the status page, I can see the completion date of each one of the tests, but my quality assurance or validation step, I can see that the very first record has not been approved yet. Once that one record gets approved, this entire work order would get filled in with the date it was approved and moved on to the validated status. Then it would be ready for reporting. So that's kind of how this flows. So if we take a look at that, I'm going to jump in and I'm going to approve that run quickly. And I'm going to QA this run, which requires special permissions, also a password. And then that will be approved, and then the work order is now going to be validated. So now that it's validated, I can go ahead and report it. And under this reports button, all of my report selections have been reported. What kind of reports I want to be included in here, a table of contents, a cover letter, a case narrative, the analytical results, a QC report, a dates report. We have over 20 different report types available that you can use to generate. So I can make changes here right now, or I can, if I reviewed it properly, the report options are set over here at the work order level. So if the review is complete enough, at the time you go to report it, you usually don't have to make many changes, if any. So at this point, I would simply print soft copy button, and it'll go ahead and generate me this particular work orders analytical report, invoice, EDD, whatever I happen to have selected. So in this case, there's an invoice, and I have my analytical report, and I believe there is an EDD as well. We have the ability to bill clients by month instead of by work order, and this particular client is a monthly billing client, so it was just making me aware of that. So I made sure that I told it to not generate the invoice. I'm going to wait for the final one. As you can see is happening here, it's generating each one of the pieces that I selected, and now it is stitching them all together into a completed report. And that report will be a PDF format, and it will open up for me so that I can review it immediately and be able to decide whether I want to approve it, or if a change needs to be made before approval and a regeneration possibly. So it's making an EDD right now as well. That's why this is not opened yet. So the same process can generate the EDD files as well as the analytical report. So that was a 30-page report that was just generated. Page numbering, version stamp of original, a case narrative with my analytical report. The report designs we have are numerous as well. Just analytical style alone, we have 15 different styles, different limits, different approach, portrait, landscape, multiple limits versus single limits. We have a dates report of when things were prepped and analyzed per sample fraction, QC report with percent recoveries and the spiked amounts and the true values and such, even down to what we have is a definitions page here at the end of what the qualifiers are and such. You'll notice here is an Excel file that's an EDD that generated the EDD that I had previously selected for this work order. So that's how easy it is to make reports. It's a one-button click. Now I'm going to take us back a little bit. That's the life cycle of a work order from a customer service perspective. Let's go back and look at it from the laboratory's perspective, the chemists, the users of the program to enter their results. As I walk in the morning as a chemist, the first thing I'm going to want to do is look at my backlog report. This contains a listing of all of the uncompleted analytical processes that are waiting to be finished. So this generates a complete list. I can use this form to filter things down and to sort into different orders. If I just wanted to look at metals prep department, then I can preview a report that shows me just the metals prep work that needs to be there. I have was it login reviewed or not? Is it rush? What's the sample name? Who's the client? What's the receive date, collected date, due date? Which procedure does it need? Has it been subcontracted? Is there a select list? If there is, what is the selection? In this case, aluminum. My holding date. Is it partially complete? Is it a repeat or a re-extraction? This one here has been sent back through the system to be repeated again. We can also look at this from a table view. And from the table view, I can use interactive sorting and come in and sort to one record here, or one department, or whichever field you want. And then I can use this Excel shortcut to shoot that out to an Excel file. And that will save it in my user directory and any filters I had applied will be there. So you can see these are only metal prep tests that are there. So if I go to this little U folder up here, that's the backlog report that it just made for me. So these can be saved as files and used throughout the day, throughout the week, as things go on. So I can see from here that I've got some mercury that needs to be prepped. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to go to the prep area, this little test tube. And in the prep area, what we do is we're going to add a new batch, and preps are done by code. So I need to go to my EPA 245 prep and create a new batch. So 7074 is a mercury batch. It's done by me. It was started on this date and time. My normal units is 25 mils to 25 mils, and I'm going to load some samples in here. So I go to the load screen. I'm going to need a method blank and LCS, and then I'm going to do the rest of the samples that are in there. On this particular sample, I'm going to do an MSMSD on it, and it's going to go ahead and load those in to my batch. As we come over here, I have a couple of pH fields that we can use, pH 1 and pH 2. We have our initial amount and our final amount. So if I use my normal amounts, they're already populated for me. I only have to change them if they're different. Over here, I have several cleanup fields that can be set if you're doing cleanup procedures on your samples before analysis. And over here, we can see some of my samples are outside of the hold time, and the system automatically flagged them and told me how many days out it was. As we come over, we can see that we've got some additional fields. We need to do a residual chlorine check, and a pH check can be set down here. This can be customized and can be configured for any test procedure you're doing for whatever value you'd like to request. We can also come over and we can load up the reagents and spikes and standards that we used. So if I used a barcode and barcode scanned in number 4, it would be methanol. So you can use a barcode scanner on this, or you can manually go in and enter and select what we need to select. We have a chemical or a reagent, and you pick out of what you have. Oh, that one's expired. So I'd have to pick one that was not expired. And that one, I didn't pick my chemical or reagent on that one. We have a similar procedure with the spikes and standards, but in this case you can specify which type it was. So my LCS got spike number 1, but my MS got spike number 2. In the equipment area, we can bring in which pieces of equipment we used in this process. And I had predefined that every time I do mercury, I use these 3 pieces of equipment, which is why they're already here. You can see I have a mercury set 1 and 2, and mercury set 1 is what's here. Now, as I finish these samples off, I can close them off one at a time by entering an end date. That one sample is ready to be run now, or I can double click up here and close out the whole batch at once, and then those are ready to be run. I can print out a report that shows me my notes, my factors, my volumes, my start and end dates. When we go to the next page, it'll even show me my spikes, and we have an equipment report, and we can print labels that can go with these bottles to show which prep batch it was and what the sample IDs are and so forth. Now that we've got our prep data in there, we got to come over to our analytical runs, and this is where we would go ahead and we would enter our data. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to do this. I'm going to go with our mercury there, and under load samples, we can load in our mercury batch that we just did. And I have to put in what method I'm using. And there are the samples we just prepped. Go ahead and say OK to load all of those. We see those appear in the analytical run. And then I can come into my single analyte worksheet, since it's only mercury, and I can come in and add in my raw result and simply type in the values that we need in here. Read these right off of my spreadsheet, and so forth. Calculate the samples. This brings in a dry weight correction if needed. It brings in my volumes and my preps. In this case, it's telling me that my limit is higher than the requested limit they asked for. So I didn't use enough sample size for this. If you notice this field, it automatically determines your recoveries and our RPD between the MS-MSD samples, and if I had a dupe. The sample's automatically qualified. I have several qualifiers that are set. H is, U is a non-detect, an asterisk means we are over our permit limit. So all of this happens automatically when I calculate the sample. Now, there is a peer review, which means I have to acknowledge the data if this is turned on or configured in your system, and I can acknowledge them one line at a time, or I can review it all at once and go ahead and acknowledge it all. Once it's all been acknowledged, then these will show up as completed and there, but they're still waiting for final quality assurance or validation. So I can go ahead and put the QA the run and put in my validation password, and all of these are completed. That's a representative of a manual entry type situation. I'd like to do one more sample loading to show you that we support data files from instruments. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and use a regular ChemStation. I'm not going to use any default values. I'm going to run the import, and in here I have some files that has some import files that I can use for this. And I'm actually going to have to go to another folder. Okay, now the file import. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to select a number of files from ChemStation and say open. Now, as this is importing, I have more than 10 files, and each one has over 80 analytes, and I'm bringing in 6 different pieces of data for each one. So I'm bringing in the concentration, the retention time, the abundance, whether it was manually integrated or not, the Q value, and the internal standard responses. And as you can see, I brought in 12 files, so that's over 5,000 data points in less time than it took for me to actually say it. So as we come over here, I imported all of the raw values. We imported whether it was manually integrated or not. We've got the retention times. I've got all the way out to my abundance and my Q values of how close the match was for those. As we calculate the whole sequence here, each index line is going to show me the results for those. I've got a number of different filters that show me just the hits, just the things that had a spike in it. So when I'm over here, my internal standards versus my surrogates, I get percent recoveries, I get auto flagging, everything very similar to the last example with the single analytes with the mercury that we just did. I get that's a manual integration that was done on that sample. I can also choose from a number of notes that may explain why something was bad. Low quality control recoveries observed, re-extraction yields the same result, meaning there's a matrix effect. I can also manually enter comments. So whatever is appropriate for those can be done. The same acknowledgement or peer review is available here, and I can do it one at a time. I can acknowledge them all at once, and I can even come in and QA the whole run at once. And with that, all of these samples become completed and done and available for reporting. We've got calibration data can be brought in. If we go to this run here, I can see my calibration data down to my different calibration types and my coefficients, all the way to my RSD and my standard deviation and my retention time windows and checks there. We have the ability to list in here what columns you were using. There's quite a bit to the analytical data section, and we can get into that in a little more detail at another time if you are interested in more details. We do support dual channel analysis for pesticides, PCBs, explosives, and can choose between the channel of what to report and what not to report. I'd like to finish up with just a couple of things. We do have a chronology that keeps track of users, date, and time, when they changed a value and what it went from and went to. All of these different events are tracked and are able to be audited. We have some financial reviews and availabilities. Here is my revenue report and which client's the best, which test is producing the most money. And on any one of these, I can put a date range in and figure out what's the proper date range. I've got my work order status. This is something a lab manager would look at. My due and overdue list, my rush list, my ready to be approved list, my ready to be reported list. We have a similar listing like that for test status. So this would be like a department head, my metals department. I could filter by department over here and look at my metals department, apply the filter, and here are my sample level and test level details of everything that's due and overdue, or everything that's rush or ready to be validated. So I've got 29 sample test results that are ready to be validated. As we get beyond that, we have this management dashboard. Then the management dashboard is going to collect a number of key performance indicators, or KPIs, that's going to let me compare how my laboratory business is operating compared to different times in the past. So in order to do that properly, I'm going to look at the yearly detail, and I've got data in here from 2007 to today. Number of work orders, number of samples, number of tests, dollars received, average days late, average on time, average turnaround time. But you can take this and we can print this table out, we can shoot it out to Excel, or we can look at it graphically. And if we look at it graphically, it's going to show us all of these values in here, and we can choose multiple values to layer on top of each other, and it'll go ahead and show you all of those. Now what's nice about this is we can further filter it down to our best client, Acme01, 80-20 rule. 80% of the revenue comes from 20% of the clients. We can look at it by department and see how the departments are doing. How is my metals department? And this will tell us the number of tests they've received over the past 5 years and how they're doing. We can do trend lines. We can look at a particular analyst and see how this M. Bailey guy is doing here, and look at his average turnaround time. It's gotten better. We can look at tests. But I think you get the idea. There's a KPI tool or a metrics tool that's available for you to go ahead and evaluate how our performance is doing. With that said, I'd like to thank you for watching this very brief overview of the Omega limb system, and we look forward to contacting you and talking more detail about our product and what we offer. And thank you for your time.